Today's guest is someone who's been at the heart of the UK's transition to electric vehicles and cleaner energy. Gill Nowell brings over 25 years of experience across sustainable energy, utilities, and environmental tech, playing a key role in shaping smart charging policy and consumer experience here in the UK. She's also founder of Hosted by Gill, co-founder of Electric Vehicle Association England, as well as being a great advocate for women in energy. Gill, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
It's brilliant to be here. Thank you, Lauren.
Welcome to Next Time Around, brought to you by Powerverse, the podcast where we take on the big questions of the green transition and explore how the world is changing for a cleaner, brighter future. We are your hosts, Richard Britton
and Lauren Forster.
And we'll be diving into the tech, the policies, and the big ideas that are reshaping industries and people's lives. Whether it's cutting-edge innovations or shifting priorities, we're here to figure out what it all means for you and the world we're building for tomorrow. So buckle up as we take a fresh look at how the changes today are laying the groundwork for a better next time around. Yeah, thank you for joining us, Gill. And I don't know how you find the time. You're clearly a very busy person. You've got a lot going on.
When you kind of read it all out or sort of vocalise it, it does seem that I am quite busy. But I suppose it's one of those things I tend not to switch off, and everything I do, I enjoy. So that helps.
That's amazing. So if you could tell us a little bit about your career. You've obviously spent a lot of time working within the industry, and talk us around how you found yourself kind of entering this space.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Richard. So yes, I suppose it all started for me back in 2000. I had a law degree, law school, an MBA all under my belt. Thought, what shall I do now? Because I knew I didn't want to do law, and found myself working in sustainability and recycling for about 10 years, actually. And that gave me a really, really good grounding, especially in terms of sustainability. And I have to say that even my recent engagement ring is recycled. So there you go. That's how deeply ingrained it is for me. But it was when I started working at a power engineering company called EA Technology back in 2012 that I discovered electric vehicles. And I was responsible for managing a bid that became a £10 million project called My Electric Avenue. And that was all about understanding the impact of clusters of electric cars on the local electricity network. Because back in 2012, nobody knew whether the grid was going to explode or not.
That was really quite early, wasn't it?
It was, yes. And we recruited over 200 Nissan Leaf drivers into the project trials. So over 18 months, 2 years, we just had a wealth of data, a wealth of understanding in terms of how people were going to drive electric cars, and also how they might or might not accept having their home charging managed, because we trialed a very early form of demand control technology with all those trial participants. We now know that technology as smart charging. So a lot of that early work informed government policy and the Automated and Electric Vehicles Act, for example. But the most exciting part of it all for me, one of the most exciting parts, was when I had my first test drive in a Nissan Leaf back in 2012. And it's the very typical thing. I sat in the driver's seat. I said to the person next to me, how do I turn this thing on? And they said, Gill, it already is on. And that was a wow moment. And then I put my foot down and it just went. And I think it was at that moment that I was just smitten and I fell in love. And really, ever since that day, I've done whatever I can to advocate for the uptake of electric vehicles and to help people overcome all the stuff you hear in the media, all the common concerns, just help people understand that actually it's probably going to be okay, because electric cars are probably okay for the vast majority of drivers here in the UK.
Yeah. And I suppose as you're going through some of those things, there's a lot of exciting experiences that you've had, but as it's creating a brand new market, a brand new service, you must have seen some things that are quite unexpected as you've been trialing and testing some things. Maybe you could share with our listeners things that have come up maybe that you didn't think would happen as part of this learning experience on the road to EV.
Yeah, one thing that I really remember very clearly was as part of the My Electric Avenue trials and test drives in local communities, there was one older gentleman who was used to driving Aston Martins, cars like that. He had a test drive in, one of the very early Nissan Leafs, and he came out of the car with a massive grin on his face. And he said, maybe not aesthetically, but that's the best car he's ever driven. That's always stayed with me. So no matter how wedded you might feel to a petrol or diesel car, I'd say to anybody, if you haven't had a test drive in an electric car, just give it a go.
It wasn't Jeremy Clarkson, was it, that you had the...
Imagine, mate, let's get Jeremy next on the EV test drive list. But I think another thing that's really I've learned along the way on my journey into e-mobility is that, because not surprisingly, I have an electric car and I have done for a number of years now. My first one was a second-hand Nissan Leaf. Then I moved to a Kia e-Niro. But it's the fact that because I'm on an EV-friendly energy tariff, then not only do I get super cheap charging overnight during that off-peak period, 7 pence per kilowatt hour, or even less, I can also shift a lot of my other big energy use into those off-peak hours. So I delay my washing machine coming on, I delay my dishwasher coming on. So that brings my energy costs down a little bit. And that's something that I hadn't appreciated before I sort of got into EV. So I think for people like myself and many others, I'm sure, it starts you thinking more holistically about how we use our energy.
Because for the average size home, if you buy an EV and you charge at home, which 80% of people do, that's doubling the amount of electricity you use. So naturally, it's going to take you into thinking about electricity a bit more carefully. And it sounds like you've taken those kind of footsteps into home energy management as well, which I know we'll get onto later as a subject. But what I liked from that is it's actually pretty simple at the moment. You've just shifted some stuff to overnight to save yourself some money.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the message, that the more people we can help understand that, the better.
Absolutely.
During lockdown, another sort of, I suppose, exciting part of the career journey for me, I was stood in my kitchen during lockdown, had a phone call saying, Jill, do you want to get involved in something really great? I said, yes, please. What is it? And during lockdown, I worked with a group of tremendous like-minded people to set up Electric Vehicle Association England. We set EVA England up as a community interest company back in 2020. And the reason we did that was because there was nobody at the time that really offered a voice into government on behalf of the current and prospective electric car driver. So it was phenomenally exciting to be a part of that. I now sit on the board of directors. I'd encourage anybody, any EV driver or anybody thinking about making the switch to an electric car, to join EVA England as a member, because the more members we have, the more powerful our voice into government. And we're doing some really, really fantastic work at the moment. You may have seen that you can use a tool that we've developed as EVA England to write a letter to your local MP. And it is so simple to do. You just tick the topics, of course, related to electric vehicles and policy that you want to communicate with your local MP about. It finds your local MP, it generates the letter. It is so simple, but such a powerful tool. So yeah, encourage anybody to look into EVA England and join up.
What came to mind as you were talking about the setup of your business was these changes don't happen very often, do they? 100 years or more, when people were first kind of getting to grips with the motor car and working out what the rules of engagement should be. And we're going through another shift now, aren't we? And having the conversations with the politicians, understanding through a community what it means to shift to electric is quite a kind of a big deal.
You're absolutely right, Richard. It is a huge transition in the way that we move from A to B in a vehicle. I was really surprised recently to discover that the number of petrol stations in the UK sits at around 8,300, and that number is in decline. And if you look on the other side of the clean air coin, we have electric vehicle public charging points, of which we now have, I think, around 80,000 connectors across about 40,000 locations. That's immense. And then we also have around 1 million workplace and home chargers as well. So if anybody says, well, there aren't enough public chargers, there aren't enough charging options around, I think, you can just point them to somewhere like ZapMap. What we need is better signage, actually. If people aren't seeing them, it's not that they're not there necessarily, although we do have some spots in the UK where there probably aren't enough. But I think the point is here that the landscape picture for charging is improving all the time.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point, Jill. Awareness plays such a big role in helping people make that switch to electric. So from your experience in this space, where do you think the market is lagging behind compared to where it could be?
So when I had that first test drive in a Nissan Leaf back in 2012, I remember getting so excited because they brought out the next generation and the range increased from about 75 miles to 85 miles. And we all thought this was absolutely wonderful. But now, battery technology has developed such that the average range of an electric car these days is 250 miles? Something like that. And if we bear in mind that 99% of all journeys in the UK are under 100 miles, and I think the average daily journey is something like 20 miles, it's not much, then you can start to see again that electric cars are suitable for most people for most journeys. So I think there's the battery technology that has developed exponentially. But for me, it's really interesting as well, because we're seeing a lot of smaller, arguably cheaper, i.e. better value electric cars coming to market, perhaps with lower ranges. But I think that's okay, because if we can sort of properly understand the range that we need on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, then those cheaper, smaller electric cars are going to be great for more people. And I think they are going to be the gateway to getting even more people to switch to an electric car. I think there's another point on cost, because over the years, I've talked a lot about total cost of ownership, electric car compared with their petrol and diesel equivalents. And if you look over the longer term, whether that's leasing or buying, generally electric cars come out cheaper, especially if you can charge at home. But now the really exciting thing is that there are electric cars being brought to market in the UK that are the same sticker price as their petrol equivalents. For example, the Vauxhall Frontiera, which is the same price up front as its petrol hybrid. And I think for a business as well, if you're looking at business leasing, if you're looking at implementing an electric vehicle salary sacrifice scheme for your employees, which is a really, really great staff benefit, then those low tax rates, the low rates of benefit in kind, means that you can access an electric car for, in some cases, up to 60% less than the cost of a normal lease.
Yes. There's a few things that you've mentioned there that are really starting to move the needle and change, I suppose, the adoption rate. And as more people get access to cheaper products entering the market, cheaper cars, the second-hand market, which is flourishing with cheaper vehicles, and then these work-based schemes. You talked a lot about range, and range anxiety has been one of the big barriers to adoption, hasn't it? But maybe that starts to dissipate as people move from the sidelines to actually taking part.
Yeah, I think so, Richard. And I think on the range anxiety side of things, I think maybe even a little while ago, it started shifting from range anxiety to charge anxiety.
Yes.
Because we know that public charges, they need to work. They need to be simple to use. We don't want to queue at them. They need to be accessible as well. And so this is where EVA England is doing a lot of great lobbying work into government on that front.
There's the lobbying part. There's also the education point, isn't there? Because, for example, the press love a good story on Christmas Eve travel. There's not enough places to charge up, as people are on their journeys. But it's about understanding the balance and leaving home with enough charge, and then planning where you're going to stop off and booking your charge. Those kind of things, which are just different from the way people have done it before. So there's the lobbying side, but there's also the education side. Do you think that the right things are being done to help people understand the best way to engage with EVs?
I think there's an awful lot of great work being done. There are campaigns and support groups such as, as a woman driver, I'm part of a fantastic online community called Women Drive Electric. I think sort of in more general terms, more does need to be done. I heard anecdotally a while ago now that somebody turned up at a public charger and they genuinely thought they'd been sold the wrong type of electric car because they couldn't get the charging cable to fit into their car because they hadn't undone the lower flap for the CCS connector because they didn't know.
And for anybody listening to this podcast who's not an EV driver, I am, and I understand the point you're making, but it might be worth elaborating a little so that some of our listeners can understand the difference.
Yes, of course. So when I'm charging at home, my Kia Niro, the charge port is at the front of the vehicle. I open the charge port and there are essentially sort of a top and bottom flap. If I'm just charging at home, I just open the top flap so I can fit my home charger in and it starts charging very happily. If I'm out and about charging on a rapid charger, so one that's going to charge my car quite quickly, a lot quicker than at home, I need to undo the bottom flap as well. And it's a different type of connector that then fits in and starts charging your car.
Has bigger and more chunky pins in it, doesn't it? So that you can charge faster.
Yes, exactly that. And I think the communication around charging, still quite a lot needs to be done. I've had cases where I've plugged into an ultra rapid charger, not with my Kia Niro because that doesn't charge very quickly, but a different car that does have the potential to charge really, really quickly on a really, really quick charger, but it was only charging at 33 kilowatt, which is slow. And I noticed that all the other cars were also charging at that very, very slow speed. So I contacted the charge point operator and they very, very helpfully gave me lots of information about the charging curve and sent me a lovely graph. Now that's absolutely fine because I'm really interested in that. But chances are that a lot of the EV driving population, all they want to do is to plug in and get the charge that they're expecting in the time that they're expecting it. So I just think everybody in the industry across the community, we need to be thinking what works for the consumer, what works for the EV driver, and just stay focused on that and explain it in as simple terms as we possibly can.
Thank you for sharing so much interesting insight about the adoption of EVs. That's obviously a growing trend and an important topic.
We've covered a lot about the electric vehicle, but obviously this shift moves into the home as well and people's personal lifestyles. So it would be great to understand what you see as the future electric home.
Yeah, I think the future home is smart, it's connected, and it's low carbon. Think solar panels, electric cars, heat pumps, smart meters, all working together in harmony. I think that's kind of the ideal vision of the future home. A lot of it's about the data. So how we manage and share it and with whom, and it's that unlocks the real value. I spent a number of years working at a company called Electrolink, and they underpin the operation of the retail energy market. So I worked on lots and lots of fascinating data-driven projects during my time there. And we used energy market data to detect electric vehicles and solar panels that had not been notified to the distribution network operator as they are supposed to be. So we used machine learning and AI to detect previously undetected cases of EVs and solar, because the distribution network operators need to know what demand is connected to the local electricity network so that they can plan ahead of need, upgrade where they need to, replace parts of the electricity network where they need to. And if they can plan ahead of need, then that's going to save money for us as customers and also avoid more of our roads and driveways being dug up than they need to be.
That's a big opportunity for us where we can use the data to avoid the roads being dug up, because the optimization and the AI is doing the hard work to distribute the energy better so that we don't need to have yet more roadworks.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the key is, as you've said, Richard, the key is interoperability. So we need to do interoperability better. We probably need simpler user journeys, and we need to a degree, put our trust in data systems. So we shouldn't have to be technology experts to benefit from smart and clean homes. It needs to be simple. It needs to be easy.
We have a phrase we use at Powerverse called unthink energy, because energy is actually not the most exciting or sexy thing. People don't really want to spend all of their time trying to work out, should I be charging my car or should I be using my solar to run my washing machine and all of that sort of stuff. So you're absolutely right. It is about the data taking the strain on that. Just on the electric home, I'm going to ask one question that comes to mind, because you've mentioned it, and that's about connecting our home systems to the grid and notifying the DNO. My own experience of that was quite poor. Interacting with the DNO was not straightforward. And like lots of these things, it's a fast moving market, and the solar installer that had put the solar on my roof and installed my batteries hadn't filled out the paperwork properly, but they had closed down and reopened as a different business, so I couldn't contact them afterwards. And the process didn't seem to be as slick and automated as all that. I just wondered if you'd got experience of working with the DNOs from your time, maybe at Electrolink or outside of that in the rest of your work.
Yes, to a degree. And actually, just sharing one of my own stories there with you, when I had my very first EV charger installed at home, for whatever reason, I knew that my local distribution network operator had not been notified. So I rang them up and I said, I'd like to just let you know that I've had a 7 kilowatt home charger installed. Can you take a note of it or do whatever you need to do with the information? And they told me that it was okay. They didn't need to know. And I kind of said, I think you do. But I was so grateful for that conversation, because then that sparked an idea. And I went back into Electrolink at the time and said, look, why don't we sort of work with this distribution network operator on an innovation project such that customers can inform DNOs when a charger or other low carbon technology is installed. So it's almost like a customer-led notification service. And sadly, I left Electrolink before I saw it come to fruition, but I do believe that they did secure innovation funding for that project. So I must find out where that happened. But on the other hand, I've had really positive experiences with my local distribution network operator. I was on looped supply with my semi-detached neighbour.
Would it be possible to explain to our listeners what looped supply means? Because I heard you and then I thought, actually, there may be people in our audience that don't know what that means.
Yeah, I shall do my best. So looped supply is where you might share your electricity service cable with your neighbour. So it's quite common if you live in a semi-detached property, for example, like I do, which means that having an electric car charger installed, if I'm on looped supply, I need to get unlooped in order for me to charge at 7 kilowatt. Otherwise, generally you get kind of ramped down to about half that. So being unlooped means that you might have to ask your neighbour if they don't mind having their driveway or garden dug up, which you would imagine might be a bit of an issue with some neighbours. Actually, my neighbour was absolutely fine with it because they saw the benefit to them in terms of future-proofing their own property by being unlooped. However, in this case, my neighbour shared a driveway with their neighbour and they'd just had a new driveway laid. So the neighbour on the other side was not so happy at the prospect of having this new driveway dug up, which is totally understandable. So in the end, I had my own driveway and part of my garden dug up, which, to be fair, I think is absolutely fair enough. They also installed 3-phase supply at the same time. And I have to say that the state of my driveway and garden is better now than it was before they dug everything up.
Amazing. So you've got a better supply. They did a really good, thorough job of putting it all in and fixing it. And this is one of those topics that's beginner. At the moment, we're talking about it on a podcast and not a lot of people know about it. But in 10 years' time, as you've rightly said, it'll come into things like home valuations, and just the natural course of, are you on a loop supply or not, will become very relevant to people. So there's still that education that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's right. And it is going to become more common. I think where I live, over 25% of all households are on loop supply. So the more people that have electric cars, the more people that have home chargers in my local area, they're going to find that they may need to be unlooped. And I think the message here is that actually it's going to be all right. And the energy networks are under an obligation to put everything back exactly as they found it, or in my case, even better than before.
You mentioned it earlier in regards to data. It's really about the trust. People need to trust to be able to do. And that's a big thing that's linked to understanding, knowledge, education, and comes from that. In terms of other changes maybe that might need to happen in terms of like technology or infrastructure or just general mindset for the adoption of EVs and the electric home to become mainstream, is there anything that you can think of there that might have a big impact?
Shared experience is a big one for me, I think. And the more that we can share our own personal stories, whether that's through social media or even just having a conversation with family or friends, over a meal, I think that in itself is really, really powerful. Although I actually find it more tricky to speak with my family about these things than perhaps people I don't know so well for some reason. I don't know why that is. My family are lovely, by the way. For so long, actually, we've been on the back foot when it comes to electric vehicles, for example. So I found myself over the years sort of trying to combat all the fear, uncertainty and doubt, the FUD. So I've done a lot of FUD fighting over the years because there has been so much misinformation in the media. But I think now we're at a stage where we just need to start talking about and highlighting the benefits. Electric cars are better value. They are arguably better technology. They're a better drive experience, for example. I remember a few years ago now, I spoke to an electric van expert, and they were telling me that in terms of mental health and well-being, drivers making the switch from a diesel van to an electric van, their mental health and well-being improved almost exponentially. Driving an electric vehicle, it's just a far more pleasant, quiet experience.
It's quieter, it's responsive, and the handling is very steady, and you don't get the kind of the jar and the judder that you do from an ICE vehicle. And so I don't drive a van myself, but I can imagine that that's true if you're on most of the day, and it really would make a difference to the quality of life.
Yes, I must say I was very brave recently because I was offered a Mercedes-Benz e-Sprinter panel van to have for a week, and they offered me the long or the short wheelbase, and I opted for the long wheelbase, so hence being very brave. Even driving that, a pretty big vehicle, it's just a lovely experience.
I had a really interesting experience, actually. I've recently moved home, and so we got a smart meter installed. And I was talking to the man around this, and he drove an electric vehicle, an electric van, and he loved it. Just had some challenges around where he charged it back to the company and some issues there. So he reached out to his business, explained the issues, and within a week, they made a step for him to change back to a diesel van, which is not what he was wanting. But he obviously raised the issues they was having, and they switched it back. And this is one of the big energy providers. So I guess it's an interesting one, really, isn't it? Because we're all moving in one direction, but there's obviously still a lot of challenges that are happening at quite a small level that have big impacts. So yeah, I guess it would be worth asking, like, do you think there's any big opportunities for business here to kind of take advantage of this, and what can they do?
Driver training is really, really important. If you're looking to switch a fleet, whether that's electric heavy goods vehicles, trucks, vans, cars, whatever the size and makeup of your fleet, it's really, really important to bring the drivers along on the journey. Literally, I was talking about this recently to people really, really involved in the electric heavy goods vehicle sector. And the overall agreement was that you absolutely need to ensure that the drivers understand, have experience of driving the electric truck or whatever it may be, understanding the regenerative braking aspect, for example, because that's different from driving a petrol or diesel vehicle, and the whole charging infrastructure aspect as well. Get comfortable with that. I know that some really big organisations have gone for a sort of try before you buy approach to bringing electric vehicles into their fleet and just allowing those drivers to get comfortable, to try them out. And in many cases that I've heard of, those drivers then do not want to go back to diesel.
It sounds like that was the case in the conversation that Lauren was having too. And so there's these policies that are, fairly new and nascent in companies for how their drivers should work. And we've talked a lot about the changes that are happening in terms of the way people are adopting EVs and the sort of new understanding and change they need to make. If we think about policy more at a kind of at a national level, are there still big things that need to be done to really sort of cement the success of electric vehicle driving for the country, do you think?
In terms of policy, I think that consistency is really key. And the industry, the sector needs clear and long-term signals, whether that's around the zero emission vehicle mandate, whether that's around EV infrastructure funding or grid decarbonisation. But equally, we need to shift the narrative. So a little bit, as I was saying earlier, we need to move away from the doom and the blame and instead focus on the benefits. So cleaner air, jobs, resilience, and lower running costs for electric vehicles. On the policy front, I think we can probably recognise the damage that was done in terms of the flip-flop by the government. First of all, the 2030 date, so the date by which we can no longer buy a new petrol or diesel car, that moved out to 2035. That was damaging because the investment community lost faith, they lost confidence. Charging infrastructure, charge point operators were quite severely affected by that in some cases. And then, of course, the move back to 2030. And I think for consumers as well, I heard lots of stories of people saying, well, my next car was going to be electric, but I don't need to now. I can wait until the next time.
And this is causing some challenges for the vehicle OEMs as well, for the manufacturers. And you can see some of them just making the call, whether their CFOs saying, enough, we can't invest in two sets of plant and equipment here. So we're going to make the shift, and JLR have done it now. And then you've got the Chinese market entrants who are electric first, have always been electric, and we've never known them as ICE providers. So the market starts to drive some of it as well, really, if the government's not.
Yeah, indeed. And I think sort of generally, we do not need any more policy U-turns. We need stable ambition, and that will then invite the investment that we need. And I hope that it is coming.
Yes, I think we all agree with you on that.
I think it's also great to cover here. Obviously, we've talked about businesses in very traditional senses. They've been working and operating these models for a long time, and now they're having to change quite a lot to future-proof EV, electric-led business model, which raises a lot of challenges. That's a big internal shift. And so a certain type of leadership is probably needed, very open leadership. What's your thoughts on the best kind of way to lead the charge here? And that pun was not intended.
Gosh, yeah. I think the biggest opportunity for leaders is cross-sector collaboration. So recognizing that there's a real kind of, is intersectionality a word? I'm not sure.
It's a new word. You've just invented it today, Jill, on next time around. So I'll be using that more of conversation.
Okay.
Intersectionality, I like it.
The intersectionality between energy, transport, technology and housing. There's huge scope for innovation, but we need leadership that is listening, that is inclusive and brings people along on that journey, essentially. I think on the innovation point, the e-mobility sector is brimming with innovation.
I gave a presentation recently on this sort of subject where, we started off with talking about different innovations, much, much older, the invention of the horseshoe. And what that did was meant that the horses could go further in one day, which meant that they got further from home. So you then had stagecoach inns along highways, which meant you also needed blacksmiths. And then from there on, that set up a new value chain around making the iron and producing the horseshoes. And so then you end up with market towns. So there's a whole interconnected value chain around one invention. And I think, as you say, when you start to look at the electric vehicle and what that's doing, it's joining energy and automotive together. But it's also, we've talked a lot here about it being connected to the home and, when you use your electricity. So it's that set of relationships between all of these different elements of the value chain that create loads of opportunity for business, actually.
Yeah, it really does. And one of the remaining barriers to EV uptake, I think, is actually for people who can't charge at home or can't charge easily, conveniently, and comparatively cheaply near to home. So, there's the Levi funding, the local electric vehicle infrastructure funding, that's beginning to materialise now. So we're going to start seeing a lot more on-street charging infrastructure being rolled out to support people who can't charge at home. There's the issue around VAT. So it's a lot lower on domestic electricity supply than it is for public. So it would be really great if, please, the government treasury could bring that down and into line. But I heard recently, I was chairing a panel, and there was an on-street charging operator on the panel, and they are looking at really exciting innovation in terms of AC, which is basically very slow on-street charging. Smart charging is really now quite common for on-street charging. So that's the idea that you can benefit from lower cost at certain times of the day. But this company is also looking at, I think it was, plug and charge for on-street charging. So this is where you just plug in and it starts to charge. There's no messing around with any kind of payment or app or even contactless, which I find incredibly easy to do. So it's just got me thinking that, there's still so much innovation to be had in the sector.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Sort of solutions that work at the point of plugging in, which means that there's, just plug and charge. Another one that I've been looking at myself, because I've got a charger at home, is joining, one of these networks where I can make my charger available to people in my community to use as well. And obviously then they pay me to charge from my charger. There's a few platforms out there, and you just sign your charger up to it and somebody comes and plugs in and it's metered and then you get paid. And there's lots of solutions to the problems, and they're not always that kind of far out of reach from a technical point of view. They're things that have been done before. So
yeah, exactly. And I think the really wonderful innovations in on-street charging is the cross-pavement gullies. So this is where when you can sort of park outside your own home every so often, because generally people don't plug in and charge every single day. It's maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks even. So this is where you have a cable sort of cut through the pavement outside your own home, and you can lay your own charging cable through that gully. So then you can plug in, charge your car, and it costs the same as your domestic energy supply, which is amazing. But the challenge there is getting all the local authorities on board to allow this to happen. Some do, some don't. Some are trialling it. Some are going to look at it in the future. So I think consistency from local government would be really, really helpful to encourage uptake.
I think the sooner we can get the data published to show how local government and others are decarbonising and hitting their own kind of ESG targets and so on, then the quicker they will have the encouragement to make those solutions happen.
So we'd like to focus and talk through like your work around women in EV. So could you tell us what inspired you to build these communities of women?
The Top Women in EV campaign has been going for about 5 years now, and it's all about supporting, uplifting, encouraging women to have their voices heard and to achieve their potential in the e-mobility sector. It's about recognising that diversity and gender equity it's not a nice to have, it's a business imperative. If we want to build a future mobility system that works for everyone, we need voices from all walks of life to design and to deliver that system. I was really shocked this year to learn that we're on track to reach gender equity, generally, globally, by 2158. That's 5 generations away. So this is one of the reasons that the Top Women in EV campaign is needed, and there are many other initiatives that are working towards the same goals. So essentially, that's why we launched Top Women in EV 5 years ago. It's about shining a light on the talent, the experience, and the leadership that already exists. We've reached over 1.6 million people across 30 countries organically. And we're seeing that women are already driving change, across engineering, across policy, across communications, across consumer advocacy. But we do need more visibility, we need more mentorship, and we need that practical support to really sort of embed this progress and to encourage more women to come into and work in e-mobility.
Sounds like an excellent thing to be doing, and we shall keep our eyes firmly on it.
That's brilliant. And I think ultimately it's the recognition that actually e-mobility is still a relatively new industry, but it's driving all these great opportunities for women.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's so important to get that extra level of creativity and kind of different perspective on things by having women in this sector. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing what you do next. And before we wrap up the end of Next Time Round podcast, we have one final question for you, Gill, which is, given you've spent a lot of time driving electric vehicles, can you tell us which is your favourite?
Yes, I can. My favourite, can I have 2, please?
Go on then.
Thanks very much. So my favourite electric car is the Genesis GV60. I've test driven so many different electric cars over the years, but I first drove the Genesis GV60 maybe 2 years ago, and it was just a sublime experience. So it's, in every way, I just love that car. My partner actually found one on the second-hand market for almost half the list price. So just touching on the second-hand market, it's really well worth looking for pre-loved electric cars on the used car market. My second favourite electric car would have to be the almost 10-year-old Tesla Model S that I had for a week recently. It had about 250,000 miles on the clock.
Goodness.
Was still on its original battery and still had a usable range of about 240 miles. And I just have so much respect for that car.
It's impressive, isn't it? Especially after everything you hear about what's going to happen to the second-hand market. I mean, that's an impressive battery life.
Indeed. Yeah. And it blows so many of those myths right out of the water.
And a very close runner-up to your favourite.
Indeed.
So we'll just say a big thank you then for joining us on Next Time Round, Gill. It's been great to have you here.
It really has. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn to search Powerverse, or share it with somebody who you think might find it interesting and helpful. To find out more about our software, visit our website www.powerverse.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.